Welcome to this deep dive. Today, we're really zeroing in on a crucial time in U.S. history, the Great Depression.
hmm
And specifically, we're looking at what President Herbert Hoover actually did, the policies he tried, to pull the country out of that economic mess.
Right. We've looked at a lot of info on this period, and the goal is to break down Hoover's attempts, really clearly.
Exactly. Straightforward language, so everyone gets a solid handle on this important chapter, no confusion.
Absolutely. And I think before we dive into the specific actions, like the laws and agencies, we kind of need to understand the thinking behind it all.
You mean his economic philosophy?
Yeah, exactly. What shaped his first responses? And that really starts with this idea of laissez-faire economics.
Laissez-faire. Okay, sounds a bit academic. What's the simple version, and what does it mean in practice?
Well, it basically means leave it alone or hands off. The core idea is that the government should interfere as little as possible in the economy.
Just let it run its course.
Pretty much. The belief was that the economy has natural cycles, supply and demand will sort things out, and government intervention often just makes things worse or slows down the natural recovery.
Okay. So Hoover comes into the Depression thinking the economy will kind of fix itself if left alone.
That was certainly the prevailing initial viewpoint, yeah. A belief in individualism
Yeah.
and that this system would self-correct.
Got it. So that's the backdrop. Now let's talk specifics. The first big policy attempt you mentioned was the Farm Board in 1929. What was that about?
Right. The Agricultural Marketing Act created the Farm Board. The big problem for farmers was overproduction. They were growing too much food, prices were collapsing.
So they couldn't make a living even though they were producing a lot.
Exactly. So the Farm Board's plan was essentially for the government to buy up the surplus crops, wheat, cotton, things like that.
Okay, trying to reduce the supply on the market to push prices back up.
That was the hope. Take the extra stuff off the market, stabilize prices, help the farmers earn more.
Seems logical on the surface. Did it work? Why did it fall short?
Well, it ran into a pretty major snag. While the board did buy a lot of surplus,
Uh-huh.
it didn't actually stop farmers from producing even more. There was no mechanism to say, okay, plant less next year.
So the government was buying, but the farmers just kept growing more and more.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
They were trying to make up for low prices by increasing volume. So the farm board just kept spending money, buying more surpluses. But the prices kept falling because the underlying issue, the massive oversupply, wasn't really being addressed.
So like trying to empty a bathtub with a cup while the faucet's still running full blast.
That's a good analogy, yeah. It treated the symptom, low prices, not the root cause, which was the overproduction itself. Eventually, they just ran out of money.
Okay, so Farm Board, limited success. What about the next year, 1930, the Hawley-Smoot tariff? This sounds different, more about industry.
It was definitely different. The Hawley-Smoot tariff aimed to protect American factories and businesses from foreign competition.
How? By making imported goods more expensive.
Exactly. It raised tariffs, which are taxes on imported goods really high, on thousands of items. The idea was, if foreign stuff costs more, Americans will buy American-made products.
Supporting American jobs and factories. Makes sense, right?
On the surface, maybe, but it had some really significant negative consequences almost immediately.
Like what? What went wrong?
Well, other countries didn't just sit back and take it. They retaliated. They slapped their own high tariffs on American goods being sold in their countries.
Oh, right, tit for tat.
Precisely. So what happened was this massive decrease in international trade. Global commerce just sort of seized up.
So American businesses that sold things overseas were suddenly hit hard too.
Absolutely. Farmers exporting crops, factories exporting manufactured goods, their markets shrank dramatically, and American consumers also faced higher prices for goods that still had to be imported.
Wow. So instead of protecting American industry, it kind of choked off trade and arguably made the Depression worse globally.
Many economists argue exactly that. It deepened the downturn by disrupting global trade networks. A real lesson in unintended consequences.
Definitely a tough one. Okay, moving to 1931. Hoover vetoes something called the Muscle Shoals Bill. What was Muscle Shoals?
Muscle Shoals is an area on the Tennessee River. During World War I, the government had built some facilities there, dams, nitrate plants for munitions.
Okay.
After the war, there were proposals for the government to further develop the site, build more hydroelectric dams, produce cheap fertilizer for farmers, and sell low-cost electricity to the public in that region.
So a big government project to create power, fertilizer, maybe spur development in that area. Sounds like it could create jobs too.
It certainly had proponents who argued exactly that jobs, cheap power, help for farmers. It was seen by some as a way the government could actively help a struggling region.
But Hoover vetoed it. Why?
This goes right back to his core philosophy we talked about. Laissez-faire, but also a strong opposition to government competing with private business. He saw the government owning and operating power plants as, well, bordering on socialism. He believed that was the role of private companies, not the federal government.
So even with the potential benefits during the Depression, the principle of keeping government out of that kind of business was more important to him.
It seems so. He argued it was improper government competition with private enterprise. So he vetoed the bill. It showed his consistency, I suppose, but also his reluctance to use federal power in ways others were suggesting.
Interesting. Okay, now let's talk about a concept we still hear about. Trickle-down economics. How did that fit into Hoover's approach?
Right, trickle-down theory. The basic idea is that if you help businesses and the wealthy, maybe through loans, tax breaks, that sort of thing, they will invest that money.
Okay.
And that investment creates jobs, stimulates the economy, and eventually the benefits will trickle down to everybody else, including workers and the poor.
So help the top, and that prosperity will eventually flow downwards to the rest of society.
That's the theory, yes. In Hoover's context, it meant focusing aid more towards banks, railroads, large corporations, believing that stabilizing them was the key to restarting the broader economy.
Which leads us perfectly into the next item, the Reconstruction Finance Corporation, the RFC, in 1932. This sounds like trickle-down in action.
It really was the most significant example of that approach under Hoover, and it was a step towards more government intervention than he'd taken before.
Okay, so what did the RFC actually do?
It was a government agency set up to give loans, big loans, primarily to banks that were in danger of failing, but also to railroads, insurance companies, and some other large corporations.
So the government was lending taxpayer money to prop up these big, crucial institutions.
Essentially, yes. The rationale was that if the banks failed, the whole credit system would collapse, taking everything else down with it. If railroads failed, transportation would grind to a halt. So stabilizing these was seen as vital.
Makes sense from a systemic point of view, but was it popular? What was the criticism?
Well, it was heavily criticized. The main argument was that it was bailing out the big guys, the bankers and corporate heads, while millions of ordinary people were unemployed, losing their homes, even starving, and getting very little direct help.
So socialism for the rich, rugged individualism for the poor, that kind of critique.
That was definitely the sentiment expressed by many critics, yeah. Why lend billions to banks but resist direct federal relief for the unemployed? It seemed unfair and wasn't addressing the immediate suffering on the ground.
I can absolutely see why people would feel that way. Which brings us to a really painful episode, the Bonus Army, also in 1932. Who were they? What happened?
The Bonus Army. Yeah, this was tragic. These were World War I veterans, tens of thousands of them. They had been promised a cash bonus for their service, but it wasn't supposed to be paid until 1945.
Okay, so a future payment.
Right, but now it's 1932, the depths of the Depression. These veterans are jobless, many are homeless, their families are destitute. They argued they needed that bonus now.
They wanted the payment early because they were desperate.
Exactly. So they organized, marched on Washington, D.C., set up camps, shanty towns, really, and petitioned Congress and the president to pay the bonus immediately.
How did Hoover respond to these veterans asking for their promised money early?
Hoover was completely against paying the bonus early. He felt it would bust the federal budget, that it wasn't fiscally responsible. He refused to meet with their leaders.
So just a flat no.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
And as the veterans stayed camped out through the summer, the situation got tense. Hoover eventually ordered the Army to clear them out.
He sent the U.S. Army against U.S. veterans.
Yes. Under the command of General Douglas MacArthur, troops used tear gas, tanks, cavalry with sabers drawn.
Yeah.
They forcibly evicted the veterans and their families, burning their makeshift camps.
Oh my God, that sounds horrific. The images must have been terrible.
They were devastating. Pictures of American soldiers driving out poor, unarmed veterans men who had fought for the country. It shocked the nation. It became a huge symbol of the government's perceived indifference, even hostility, to the suffering of its people.
A public relations nightmare doesn't even begin to cover it, I imagine. It must have destroyed Hoover's remaining popularity.
It was absolutely catastrophic for his image and cemented the perception of him as uncaring. It really fueled the desire for change.
Wow. Okay, we've gone through quite a list of policies and events. If we were to summarize Hoover's overall approach and its effectiveness, what's the takeaway?
Well, The big picture is that Hoover started deeply rooted in that laissez-faire philosophy, limited government, voluntary cooperation, balancing the budget.
Right.
He did eventually move towards more intervention, like with the RFC, but it was often seen as hesitant, maybe too focused on the top, and ultimately insufficient for the scale of the crisis.
His core beliefs sort of prevented him from taking the massive, direct action that maybe the situation demanded.
That's a very common interpretation, yes. His reluctance to embrace large-scale federal spending, direct relief for individuals, and more government control meant his policies, while representing some effort, just couldn't stem the tide of the Great Depression. The problem was just too big for the tools he was willing to use initially.
And that failure, or perceived failure, really paved the way for a completely different approach under the next president, Roosevelt, and the New Deal.
Absolutely. It led to a fundamental shift in thinking about the government's role in the economy and in providing a social safety net. Hoover's experience, in a way, demonstrated the limits of his philosophy in the face of such an unprecedented economic collapse.
This has been incredibly clarifying. Understanding those specific policies, the Farm Board, the tariff, the RFC, the Bonus Army tragedy, really paints a picture of the challenges and the mindset at the time.
It really does. And thinking about all these attempts, what strikes you the most about trying to tackle something as huge as the Great Depression?
For me, it's probably the sheer difficulty of knowing what will work. Hoover tried things based on his beliefs, but they often had unforeseen consequences, like the tariff, or just were enough, like the RFC for many people. It highlights how hard economic crises are to navigate.
That's a really key point. There often aren't easy answers. And maybe a final thought for listeners to ponder. What questions does this raise for you about government's role? When should it step in? How much? And who should benefit first during a crisis? Then versus now?
Definitely a lot to think about there. The debate continues today, for sure. Thanks for walking us through this critical period.
My pleasure. It's always valuable to revisit these historical moments.
Indeed. And thank you all for joining this deep dive. We'll talk again soon.